people can label fear as a negative emotion. I think it's one of the most powerful forms of internal wisdom to tell us what we need to face, the conversation we need to have, the choice we're avoiding, right? The thing that we're uncertain of, or the scary thing that is actually a catalyst for our growth, for our evolution.
Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast, a space dedicated to one belief that you have the power within to create everything you seek. So if you are ready to step into a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with me. I'm your host, Rudi Riekstins, and this is the Empowered Life. Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast. I'm your host again, Rudi Riekstins, and today I'm joined by a dear friend, and I think by the end of this episode, you're going to be calling him that too. His name is Ali Jafarian. Ali is a software engineer, serial entrepreneur, a podcaster, and he is also the Chief Transformational Officer at Front Row Dads. He leads retreats, adventures, virtual experiences for fathers that are committed to living more intentional lives with presence and conscious leadership. Tell me that we haven't found somebody who better represents the empowered life. He is also a husband and a father of two beautiful children, and he is guiding men to be able to create deeper connection, not only with their partners, their children, but with themselves. I had the pleasure of spending a little less than a week with this man, and it is where we began to form our friendship and bond. We are very similar people. We operate in very similar circles, obviously in very different ways, but at the foundational core, we do look at life through a very similar lens. And I immediately just loved this man for who he is and how he shows up, his presence, his awareness. And we're going to dive into learn a little bit more about him and how he has been able to become the version that he is today and turn around and teach what he so beautifully demonstrates for other people. Ali, thank you so much for joining me in the Empowered Life podcast. I appreciate you, brother. And right up front, I just want you to know I love you deeply and profoundly. And I just love how you were showing up and showing other people what it looks like to lead from the front.
Wow. I don't have many introductions of that quality, that caliber regularly. So thank you. In fact, I tend to lean into a simpler way of being, especially on my podcast, which you're going to be on, where I ask people to introduce themselves. So thank you. I received that, Rudi. And I will quickly reflect. We had this beautiful time together. And I was thinking as I was preparing for our chat today, I was like, Rudi's one of the few people that energetically I know enough about you without knowing much about you. And that may not make sense for people, but it comes back to two words you said, presence and awareness. Very, very important words in my life. In fact, two words that amongst all these different labels and identities we can hold, I love those words. So thank you for honoring me with those words. And I wanted to tie them back to my first impression of you is I was like, oh, this is a man who's present and aware. And I felt that. I didn't need to think it. I just felt it. So the love is mutual, brother. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. You see, I already knew my audience would love you. You are 100% part of the Empowered clan. I believe that every single moment is a divine moment orchestrated by God. And we can come from different walks of life with different upbringings, but man, we cannot argue that every single moment is uniquely, divinely curated. And so when somebody is in front of me, I give them my absolute presence because I look at it through the lens of God's made this moment real and has made it happen, and I need to meet that expectation. And I know that you do the same. I wanted to start by first asking you maybe not an orthodox question to open up a podcast interview, but I see you as somebody who is a deep thinker. You seem to be very aware. You're not just present with people, but you seem to have a presence within yourself, very contemplative. I find you as an observer. We were in a large men's retreat, 30 to 40 guys, all profoundly successful individuals running around. And yet I noticed that you would be sitting always with this perplexed look on your face, contemplating, thinking. Somebody asks you a question, you would pause for a moment before you would answer. How would you describe yourself and how you show up in the world, and how do you view the world?
Well, you wanted to start with the easier questions, huh? How do I view the world? The easy way is to see it in the parallel two forms, is the outer world and the inner world. So the outer world is the perceived experiences, which tend to lean a lot against thinking, ego, not in a good or bad way. It's just the ego likes to control the outer world from my perspective, the ways that I've experienced reality. The inner world is where it gets a little more interesting. It's about depth, feeling, soul, divinity through God, words that you use, really awesome words. And then there's multiple other worlds. I'm just using that as a really simple dichotomy for how I can quickly make sense and shift like, oh, this is just an outer world sensation right now, or ooh, this inner world thing I just felt. I'm not even sure how to explain it to you because it doesn't come from the mind. It doesn't have this easy interpretation. So I'd start there is that that's brought me a lot of clarity in just having some separation between the outer and inner world and knowing that they blend, knowing that there's integration. That's the entire perception of reality. Back to what you mentioned, though, and thank you for seeing me this way as someone who pauses and listens deeply. I've always been curious. It's one of my top three core values. Curiosity, freedom, and nature are three things that I value above others, and they guide me. So whenever I'm in presence, conversation, especially the environment we just came from, like you said, with other extraordinary men, where we're all sharing and there's a mix of vulnerability and intelligence and challenge. My preferred way of being, Rudy, is to listen first and then listen deeply because I have a better sense of what I want and what I need from being present when I can hold curiosity, hold curiosity, hold curiosity. And then I'm generally the type of person that wants to be asked before I speak. I don't like to speak and have the spotlight and all these things. They're just not natural for me. However, if I'm asked into something, then of course I want to share. And typically I've just learned that I need to really be in the thing 100% committed to observe, hear, absorb all the stuff before I can have something thoughtful to say. That's what comes up.
I definitely noticed that about you. When you spoke with authority and you didn't feel the need to fill space, meaning an answer could be one word, it could be 10 words, or it could be 10 minutes. But you felt very confident in your delivery. And I think the biggest challenge that I've always come up with is that I say something and then I question, do they get it? Maybe I should say it a different way. And it's you have this confidence and this knowingness about how you show up that you've planted a seed and it'll grow or it won't grow. And that doesn't somehow detract or take away from your value or your meaning. You work with men, mostly men. And obviously, Front Row Dads is prevalent, profound platform supporting and healing so many men. And I asked that question because I was super curious. What is your approach to how you view the world and how do you operate? Because you do such great work supporting men in being able to do the same. I would argue almost every single man that comes through Front Row Dads or any other men's group or coaching program or platform that is seeking something else that they would pay an inordinate amount of money to be able to have that level of self assuredness and confidence that you have. What is it that you do from a morning routine practice? Maybe it is a way of being, maybe it is how you question things to stay curious. How could you support somebody that's listening to this and knowing that my audience is not just men? How could we as people be more confident in who we are and how we show up without putting our validation on other people to somehow validate ourselves?
Great question. Everything for me starts with stillness. So, to share a little bit about my morning routine, when I wake up, I stretch and then I go downstairs and I put some hot water on and then I immediately go out and touch the earth. So, we have a rule in my house: we touch the earth before we touch a screen. It's the simplest practice of grounding, but it's way beyond just planting our feet. It's connecting with the thing that we come from in a still and silent manner to ground, pun intended, to what's real, to the moment. And then I go back inside, Rudy, and I have some hot lemon water or some tea or some coffee. I meditate. So I know you're a big advocate for meditation. as well. But I need that silence. I need to start in that silence, which is me just being with sometimes my thoughts, sometimes sensations that are emerging, sometimes things that happened yesterday. And you actually gave me a beautiful reflection, something that I'm now challenging and weaving into my morning routine, which is it's not always about reflection, but it's an intention about what do I want to create today? How do I want to show up? So thank you for that. That was very profound for me, that what you offered. It can be a mix of reflection, inquiry, and then an intention for what's the energy I want to bring to this day. So to summarize, I think what's worked for me, and this is my experience, is meeting the day in stillness and then slowly, gradually, intentionally moving in to the chaos because the day is going to bring chaos. If you're a parent, an entrepreneur, a leader, any of these things where you have responsibility, you're going to embrace chaos. It's inevitable. It's just creation. And so knowing that that's coming, I love to start with stillness. And in fact, that's usually how I also end my day is in stillness. My daughter and I, she's 8 years old now. Sometimes we do this beautiful eye gazing. So in silence, we just gaze. And this is also something that came through Front Row Dads. So some of the work we do as men and fathers and leaders. And the intention is like, can we sit for 5 or 10 minutes and just get lost in each other's eyes without speaking? Without noise, without words. They have a place. Like words are a tool, they're a communication mechanism. But I'll finish this thought by saying I also think words get us into a lot of trouble. Because if we're not communicating clearly and consciously, we're just creating even more chaos and confusion. So that's why I prefer stillness and silence and then chaos, which is going to come. I love movement. So I usually incorporate movement into my day, Rudy. It's essential for the best Ali that can show up and then landing back into stillness, some reading before I finish the day.
I want to ground for the benefit of my audience that may or may not have been putting on makeup, blow drying their hair, driving to work, listening to this in the background, and didn't catch the brilliance in all of what Ali just shared. To start your day by grounding your feet and his words, where you come from, coming from the earth, and grounding your presence back into the present moment. You can't be anywhere else than where your feet are at. And when you start your day that way, before you touch a screen, you're choosing to be in calm. You're also discharging any stress, any anxiety directly into the earth. And there's a magnetism power potential that is available to you in starting your day that way and making this a practice that's not just for you, but for your family. You know, I follow Ali on social media, and I recommend you do too. I'm going to put his Instagram into the show notes. He does silence days with his family where nobody speaks and they just are present. And I think that that's such an incredible thing to teach young children and also to practice within yourself. In addition to that, they all go outside together as a family. And there's a video I recently saw with his two kids, and they all go outside and they ground. And then he asks them, how do you feel? How do you feel? So bringing presence and awareness to that. And then also use the example of how when we go out and into our day, we're met with chaos. And I liken it to being in the still point. The still point is when we're in the calm solitude of our mind. And then the minute we navigate with the world has expectations of us. And that's going to feel chaotic because it is an expectation outside of an expectation we may have had. And that will feel difficult, but we can always come back in. And when you create the habit of doing that in the beginning of the day, finding it in the middle of the day, and doing it as a practice at the end of the day, well, that is how you show up the way that you beautifully do, which is always still and present, which is just absolutely beautiful. I wanted to follow up with that question by asking you to explain a little bit about Front Row Dads and what you do and how you do it. But I think it's going to beautifully come through in our questions and answers. And so feel free to answer that question in any one of the answers that I offer, because I want men to find you. I want wives to hear this and be like, damn, my husband's got to go and spend some time with this guy because clearly there's something he can take from him. But you said a word that I want to unpack a little bit more. It was also included in the intro that I did for you, but conscious parenting. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of men that are hearing that and they're like, I don't even know what that means. It sounds like some kind of woo or new age something. Like, how do I even achieve that? What is conscious parenting to you? And you've already explained it through your behaviors, but I'd like you to give it to us in a step by step format. How can somebody be a more conscious father And then how do you bring that into your work through front row dads?
Beautiful question. I'm going to land into that for a second. What is very clear in that has emerged for me in being more conscious in my role as a father is learning how to feel. And I'm going to blend some of the things you asked about front row dads to give a nice bridge into that world. Many men, including myself years ago, have a low threshold for feeling. We're in our heads. It's an intellectual game. And again, back to the ego, we're just good at it. We've learned how to protect ourselves, make decisions, get shit done, all these things that align with an achievement oriented persona. And that's fine, that can serve you. But what can happen is it also shuts down the feeling sense. So the more feminine energy, the more embodying and I like to use the word absorb, absorbing what's actually happening, again, without words, without thinking too much. And I'm starting here, Rudy, because the most profound things and ways of being I've experienced with my children, who are now 8 and 10, is being with them and feeling them. So when I have breakthroughs or connections with them, or some of our highest energetic moments of love, pain, the whole range, it's not usually because I'm telling them something. In fact, stopped yelling in my home many years ago as a byproduct of a front row dad's retreat where another brother shared something. He's like, "Yeah, my mom would yell in my home and then it didn't mean anything to me after a while." And I was like, "Oh, of course. If I'm always yelling, then that's the norm, and the children start to expect it, etcetera." So, it's an example where I learned that vocal fathership is not always the most effective, and I see that a lot in a lot of homes where you can experience the disconnect. It's just this screaming, and then there's the block. There's no feeling. It's just all this verbal blah, 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 blah. So, from a young age to today, I'm very attuned to the body language of my children. What is their body telling me beyond what their words are saying? Because even to a certain degree, children don't know how to answer why until they get a little bit older. And yet, that's the thing we ask them when we get triggered or frustrated with a situation. Why'd you do that? They don't know. They honestly don't know. And their body will tell you that, even if their words don't make sense. So, first is feeling, which has, again, a relationship to presence. The second thing, which is interesting, and this continues to show up in new ways, Rudy, is that I also have formed a very deep connection with my children when I was going to use the word operate, but when I allow myself to be at their level, meaning not sometimes I will physically, if we're in a deep conversation or a decision, I will drop down to meet them where they are instead of being big, strong, tall dad whose stature's way above them. But more importantly, I can shift and be like, how could I actually play and be more curious and bring wonder to this situation like they do? They don't have all these serious adult tools that we have. We acquire this as we grow and mature. Whereas a lot of their world is about fun, play, and then they teach us constantly how to show their emotional range and then not hold it. So they don't suppress lots of emotions. I use tantrums as the best example. And I smile a lot when I see a kid throwing a tantrum instead of getting all scared and frozen because I'm like, oh, they're just expressing themselves. They don't feel heard or seen. So there's something there. It's coming through them. And then 10 minutes later, they're done. They're on to the next thing. They're curious about something. They're playing with something else. So that's a second thing. The final thing I would say is it comes back to, again, a word that is just really hard to avoid. But it's like, can you stay curious as a dad? One of the things that we say in my home is we learn nothing when we're right. It's hard to move through the human experience and not use the words right and wrong. They just come up. I've learned to hold them loosely, use them sparingly. And I like using righteousness as a way to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Are we so into our thoughts and beliefs that this is the only way, this is the truth? And I'm a big advocate of finding our own truth. And so it's something that I talk and model and practice with my children a lot. It's like, hey, let's let go of this whole right or wrong. And can we learn something here? Can we stay curious? Because there's usually something to learn. Finally, I'll map this to front row dads, the very short version to honor your question. So it's an extraordinary community. It changed my path. So I found it 7 years ago. It's a mix of doing world-class retreats, which I now help design and lead. My buddy John founded the community because he was just struggling as a father. And he's like, "Is there anyone else out there who is, like, challenged by this?" And he was willing to be vulnerable. He was willing to bring that curiosity, some of that suffering forward, and he just created this amazing group. So we have all kinds of experiences now, which I'm happy to share about, but we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, which is really exciting. So it's a pretty mature group, and this whole philosophy and my perspective on conscious parenting is a byproduct of Front Row Dad. So our slogan has been family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. We stand in that, and it has taken us into all these beautiful places that have a mixture of conscious parenting, emotional intelligence. We go deep in many realms. So in the short time that I've experienced with you, I'm like, holy cow, like Rudy is living into these things that we believe in, that we embody it. So thank you for asking about that. That's the short version of what FRD is.
I love everything that you said and how you show up and practice it in your home because I also believe, as you were talking about in the beginning of the episode today, that my energy introduced me long before we really introduced ourselves and we had any form of meaningful conversation. And I think that when you're teaching, the energy and the intensity with which you teach is going to be conveyed equal to you walking your truth. You actually practicing what you preach, that coming through the words that you have. When we believe what we're saying, it lands very differently. When we practice what we say, it lands very differently. And people can actually resonate. They can feel that. And so I love, love, love how you choose to show up as a father and how you choose to show up as a husband. I'm curious with all the work that you've done with so many men, most of whom have achieved semblances of success. They're moving forward, but they're wanting to create something better at home. You've given us a lot of things that we need to do. I'm kind of curious, what do you think is the biggest problem that you see that holds people back from doing that organically? Meaning, you're doing it. So it is possible for a father and a husband to figure it out. Why are so many men getting stuck and not able to figure it out? What's that one thing or the things that you see that the average person is being held back by before they come to you and your programs?
Great question. You know what comes up for me, Rudy, is I'm thinking about simple but powerful tools, and I've got one in mind, and I want to emphasize what you mentioned is that it's much easier to learn something and then just store it in your intellectual bank, but not go do it. And so this particular tool, which is around emotions, it's something I picked up from Conscious Leadership Group, another extraordinary group that I practiced with and learned from and walked with for quite some time. Still have a great relationship with them. Is bringing awareness to these four core emotions. So these are the four emotions that we tend to feel a lot as humans. The first is anger, then fear, sadness, and joy. There are lots of emotions, to be clear. These are just the four that I've learned come a lot, they come often, and I'm going to map this to how they show up at home with children. So, to give you the tool, there we can say that these four emotions represent something. They mean something. And there's so much work around emotional intelligence that I don't want to act like I know and this is the truth. This is just my experience deploying these tools. So anger, when you feel anger means something needs to change. It's that simple. Fear means something needs to be known. Sadness means something needs to be let go of or released. And joy means something needs to be celebrated. And so this tool was one of those things that when I first heard it, Rudy, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And mentally, I was like traversing some things that had happened recently. I was like, oh, yeah, I was angry there. Something needed to change. This is what needed to change. But it didn't actually make a difference in my life until I started practicing it. That's the hard part, right? It's easy to hear it. It's even easy to understand it, but to practice it takes courage. So, for example, when I get frustrated in my home with my children, it's easy to raise my voice, or even my pattern was to just walk away. I'm frustrated. I have no more words. I'm just going to leave, which could be even more harmful because then they could have a story like, oh, dad's leaving again. What's going on? Even if it's just leaving the room, right? But the courageous work, the harder part is to stand in that and be like, ooh, kiddos, I feel anger. Something needs to change here. I'm really tired of picking up your shoes and socks from the living room. I love your little feet, But when I'm deploying all this energy, constantly picking up your mess, I cannot invest more time with you. This is just an example. And this is a real example. It happened in my home. It still does to a degree. And fear is a big one. So fear comes so much, fear has actually become my friend. People can label fear as a negative emotion. I think it's one of the most powerful forms of internal wisdom to tell us what we need to face, the conversation we need to have, the choice we're avoiding, right? The thing that we're uncertain of that or the scary thing that is actually a catalyst for our growth, for our evolution. So I really enjoy fear. And that one shows up a lot in my partnership with my wife. Back in the day, I would avoid the hard conversations or I'd get triggered and I'd hold my story instead of saying, hey, I need you to know I'm kind of scared about this. Like the way that you are like holding this responsibility or whatever, it just scares me. I don't know what to do with this. Just the courage of voicing that has brought so much clarity to our relationship than holding it in and suppressing it and then going off and acting like it didn't happen, etc. These are just a couple examples. But again, what you recognized with the practicing is that this is just an example of a tool where these emotions can mean something and then give me the internal wisdom to then go do something or take action on them. But they don't matter unless you practice them. They don't matter unless you do it. And this comes back to what you're asking is that a lot of guys, high performers, they learn, consume input, listen to podcasts, read this. I was one of those read 100 books a year type of guys. And I had to pause and be like, yo, I've read enough. I need to go out in the world, the outer world, my inner world, and go practice these things, deploy them. So it might not sound like a profound answer, but that's it. I mean, that's what I see.
That it is so profound. And I'm going to go back and make you answer it again, but a little less clunky. My question, you gave us examples and you only gave two examples for anger and for fear. And I would love for you to just give an example of all four because I want people to be able to see how simple is it to use the actual emotions, the four emotions, and then what would be an example that we could tie it to? Not everybody's going to have kids leaving shoes at the door. God knows that is a problem in my home that I address on the daily. And so being able to reframe those, I want as the audience hears Ollie's response to also filter this through how the brain produces emotion and that emotion is an indicator of a thought and that the body has an automatic reaction. And the minute you name the emotion, meaning when he turns to his wife and says, you've got this expectation and I have fear around it, he reduces the chemical dump of that emotion by 60 to 80%. And naming it automatically brings you out of the fear and back into logic and reason so you can articulate what you were feeling. But you also mentioned joy. And so I would love to hear the examples for all of them so that people can say, oh, now I know what to do with that.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you, Rudy. So let's go to sadness next. So sadness means something needs to be let go of, or I like to say something needs to be released. Extreme versions of sadness have an obvious relationship to death, right? If you look at when we get really upset when we lose a loved one, it's sadness and then it transitions into grief. That's extreme. It's also kind of obvious. Where I see sadness show up a lot is in our everyday patterns of just accepting relationships that are no longer of service to us. So these could be simple things like a commitment to doing this thing for a friend that you don't want to do. Okay. And I'm just going to leave that there for a second. You're out of integrity. You're like, this drains my energy. I said yes to this. I'm still doing it, etc. Then there's a deeper thing, like a deeper example where you may be in a romantic partnership or a business partnership with someone, and deep down inside, you are not happy, right? You know it, and you kind of mask it. And what sadness is telling you underneath all that is that something needs to be released. Now, sadness is tricky because another thing that comes into these emotional intelligence tools is that anger is usually a bodyguard for fear or sadness. So, meaning when we experience anger, something needs to change, right? If it rises through our system, we feel in our shoulders, our head, we get frustrated, overwhelmed. Usually there's fear, something needs to be known, and or sadness under there, something needs to be released. And those are a couple of the examples I gave you. Whereas Crying feels like an obvious thing where we have an emotional release. But these relationship issues, most of the relationship issues that I've experienced us get into as humans, whether they're romantic, business, professional, whatever, are this deeper knowing like, oh, this is no longer of service. I need to let go of this. You see, but anger will protect it and just like, no, 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 something needs to change. They'll get better. This thing will shift, right? A new opportunity will come. Whereas, like the informant, the deeper wisdom is sadness. Then there's joy. So, joy is the easy one that is not as deceptive. It means something needs to be celebrated. And what I'll share about joy is I believe we don't usually honor it enough. So, meaning joy will come through us, we'll feel it all over our body. It's tingly, and then especially guys like me have had a pattern where like, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. That's my job. I'm supposed to do that. I've got my leadership hat on. Like, that's just part of the role. Instead of being like, this was freaking awesome, like a kid, and like jumping up and like letting the joy flow, just like a child lets the tantrum flow in a different range, right? That's the beauty of joy. And we even got a little bit of that while we were together with Carrie's group, like playing games, doing things that evoke, I call it like joy without demands. There's joy in the world of being leaders and making these strategic decisions that help impact people. But then there's also joy in just being a human and be like, this is really fun, and smiling. That's the last thing I'll say here, Rudy, is that smiling is the simplest form of allowing joy to come through. So I noticed people smile. You have a beautiful smile. There are a few other guys we were with at Carrie's event where I was like, I just want to acknowledge, like, you've got a really great smile. And you can tell because not all humans let themselves smile a lot. They kind of mask it. They're like, like I said, it's not that big of a deal. That's the ego flirting. And that's an example where we're suppressing the full range of joy.
You know, when I met my wife and we were dating, she said to me in the very beginning of our dating relationship, she goes, I've never met a guy who makes such a big deal out of like nothing. And I was like, I don't really know what that means. Like, am I mildly offended or am I curious? Like, what? What did that mean? And she's like, you find the smallest thing to celebrate and then you make a big deal out of it. And so in my house, like your birthday is not just your birthday. You lose your name. You become birthday boy, birthday girl. You get woken up. You get brought down like a king or a queen to the table. You've got a crown of flowers surrounding your plate. There's a specific breakfast made for you. Your presents are there. Everyone at the table has to say something about you that they love about you. There's music that's played for you all day long. Your birthday boy, your birthday girl. You're reminded constantly the whole day that it's your birthday. This is for you. And my wife could come home and say, oh my gosh, when she was in corporate America, she's a coach today with me in our business, but she would be in corporate America and she would get a positive accolade or a recommendation or a bonus. And I would make the biggest deal out of these things. And she'd be like, it's really not that. I'm like, it is. And I think that you're so accurate that we don't do this on the daily where we really look at all the areas. And I didn't know at the time that what I naturally did is such an important part of high performance. And I want to ground that for the audience that now I know the data behind the act of looking intentionally every day for something to celebrate. You're stacking evidence, you're stacking wins, you're getting dopamine hits, but you're also validating that you're doing work, you're taking action, and there's the reward. And it's such a simple yet beautiful process. So thank you for sharing that.
Well said, brother. Well said. You remind me, Rudy, that there's so much beauty in life. It's a gift. Like waking up is a gift. Being on this podcast with you is like a really great gift. Being able to ground with my children is a gift. There's so many gifts. And you are just a beautiful reminder that if we pause and like look at what's happening and experience it in its entirety, there's just gifts everywhere. Now, there's also pain and suffering. I don't want to sound like the guy who's like, oh, everything's just beautiful. There is real stuff happening in the world. This is the essence of nature. I tell people a lot because nature, again, is my jam. This is life, right? This wave, people who can see the video for this, it's highs, it's lows, it's balance, it's integration, it's mountains and valleys. At least that's my experience. So, yes, to what you said around looking for these things that we can celebrate. And then also on the other end, it's like there will be dark moments. And if you allow yourself to experience that, there is a gift there. I promise you.
There is a gift in every moment, and it just depends on how we choose to look at those moments. And so you have twice today in this interview, repeatedly in your social platforms, your website, etc., referenced the power and the importance of nature. And so I would like you to speak into a little bit about how big of a part should nature be playing in a high performing man's life?
Oh, well, if you want my perspective, I think we need access to nature every day. It can be as simple as, like I said, grounding, taking a walk around your neighborhood or wherever. And it could be as simple as finding a tree, just sitting next to a tree. But there are so many things I could share here. And what I will try to do to simplify it is that as a kid, I loved nature, like jumping around, climbing in trees, running around. It was the playground before I was introduced to the other playgrounds. And then the playground evolved into all kinds of things through adolescent, young adult, fatherhood, like all these different seasons of life and transitions. But the last several years, Rudy, I've really, really fallen back in love with nature. And some of the things that come up that I deeply believe in this season of life is that nature is my greatest mentor. Like I've had some amazing peers, friends, coaches, people that I used to label mentors and play this whole game of putting them on a pedestal. I rarely do that anymore. You know, it happens every now and then. I'll be like, oh, shoot, I'm putting this person on a pedestal. I'm creating some comparison in my mind. But the only thing that I say with certainty right now that is a true mentor to me is nature. And more often than not, when I look at a pattern or I look at an issue in my world, outer inner world, I'm like, what would nature do here? What's the pattern? Like, what is the rhythm? Or because I actually think that almost everything natural we experience comes from nature in some way. And then there's the artificial world, which has its place, right? Especially now in 2026 with the advent of AI, like it's very real. But there's a difference between the things that come from nature, where at some point a human observed this and said, well, I could create something. And then there's the artificial world, is a different discussion, which has material desires and other things that tend to go beyond nature's design. The last thing I'll say is that it's where I find clarity, like complete clarity. So one of my ways of practicing self-care is I go climb mountains. We call them 14ers out here in Colorado where I live. They're mountains that go up 14,000 feet, which is pretty high. And when I take these trips, sometimes they're 5 hours, sometimes they're full days. They always offer me something, especially when I go solo, Rudy. And the gift is being in a natural environment, trees, rivers, mountains, sun, the silence, the solitude. And then, of course, there's all kinds of things that happen, like standing on the summit, like allowing myself to experience that moment and the things that transpire. But it is literally, it's hands down where I find the most clarity. Like other forms are great, meditation, breath work, things that I practice regularly. But when I'm in nature, the world of stress and chaos fades. And it's just like, oh, this is really peaceful. And so I try to give that gift to my family, to front row dads, to my friends, to everyone I come in contact with. One of the things I really enjoy right now, which is quote unquote work, but for me, it's purpose, it's play, is designing adventures. And most of my adventures take place in nature. It is literally the best container for all the reasons I've mentioned.
I knew your response would be so good. I want to pivot slightly. And so I believe, as do most of the sages, that the teacher that is teaching something most needs to learn what it is that they're teaching. And I would love to know from you, as somebody who helps men heal, helps men become more conscious, present, grounded, connecting a little more to their inner truth and understanding that life is more of an opportunity to learn and to grow and to connect back to kindness and compassion. I would love to know from you, what have you learned specifically from these men rather than what have you actively taught them?
So much around safe spaces and vulnerability. That has been easily the number one gift of Front Row Dads is being which happened from day one when I joined, and now it's something I get to help co-create, is being able to drop in and connect with men who are no longer, like, holding up their defense systems and masks and facades. So vulnerability for sure. I continue to learn that and practice that. Courage is at the top of the list. So I've seen some guys do some courageous things from sharing dark, deep stories and bringing their truth forward, which is a form of freedom, you know? And by doing this and being allowed to witness it, it gives me more courage. This is very similar to the experiences I've seen people have in church, like specific churches, regardless of what you believe, when you have people so connected to something and are willing to bring things forth, like being a witness, you get your own growth. So that's one of the things that comes up for sure, Rudy, is courage. The last thing I'd say is a word that comes to mind when what I experienced through you and what I continue to kind of experience energetically through you, which is love. So, love is a word that I think can be easily used or overused. And there's so many ways to describe love, but I tend to align with love being having a really like close relationship with abundance. And so you are a man of abundant energy. I recognize that quickly. I felt that. And I think that when trust and courage and integrity, all these things are present in a safe space, love just flows. And it's not easy to find that kind of love, like that abundant love that's real, it's indescribable. So this is where we start to, like I said, shift back into the inner world. Like I've had some experiences, both in Front Row Dads and other personal experiences, where I'm like, I don't know what this is, but it feels like something that love is the best word I can use for it. And so I've been really grateful to receive that gift through men's work and all types of experiences. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you for answering. We are coming up on time, and I want our audience to gain the most out of this episode. And obviously, you pour into men beautifully. Front Row Dads is profoundly successful in size, scale, but I'm measuring it in impact. And there is a woman right now listening, and I want to speak what is on her mind. She has a husband who's hustling and grinding and working to perform because he's been conditioned to believe that his value and his worth is in providing for his family. And he's not always present. He doesn't come home and throw the ball. He does not speak about nature and grounding with the passion that you do. And she's thinking, how on earth do I tell my husband that this is something that he needs? I would love for you to maybe speak directly to her, help her formulate a way to introduce this concept that he might be open or receptive to looking into joining you for one of your outdoor adventures?
Wow. That is a great question. And I'm pausing because I'm recalculating all the things that I've observed do not work with this scenario. So I'll start there. Do not tell your husband he should go check out Front Row Dads. Don't do that. Do not buy a ticket to one of our events for him and then surprise him. Because again, he did not choose that. You will catch him off guard from the start. You will erode some trust. I think you get the point on what do not prescribe this. I think it comes down to just childlike curiosity, Rudy. So like, have you heard about this? My wife likes to send me whenever she sees something on Instagram, usually like nature related or philosophy, she'll just send it to me like, "Do you know about this?" I think that's a soft way to introduce it because we are a group of achievement oriented mostly entrepreneurs, and it can be intimidating. I've learned that when in reality, we don't intend to intimidate anybody. We are actually very welcoming and we want the right man who's ready to step into a more courageous environment. And so I think soft, subtle curiosity is the way. Our podcast is really great. So again, my buddy John leads the podcast. He has been for years and great conversations like this, Rudy, where like getting into deeper deeper human experiences. This isn't just how to be a better dad, but like there's some real stuff on that podcast. That's how I actually found Front Row Dad 7 years ago. So I think that's a really soft way in saying, hey, there's a podcast here. It's about, screaming at home or aligning with nature. That could be a good way. But yeah, that's the way I would offer it without a crazy strategic response is subtle curiosity, not a prescription. Because the second you say should, the guard goes up. It's like, no thanks.
I love that curiosity came up in almost every single response today. And if anyone listening to this could walk away with one golden nugget, it would be to live your life with curiosity. When you're curious, the brain's looking for more information. It's not automatically responding based on the default pattern. And that's what we came here for. We came here to learn. We came here to grow. We came here to not know everything. I love to talk into know nothing to know everything. If you walk in with the assumption you already have the answers to everything, then you're going to walk out with the same knowledge that you walked in with. And to position something to somebody using curiosity and saying, oh, I saw this and it was interesting. And then you leave it at that and that germinate.
Hmm.
It's the way you communicate naturally, and it's the way that you just suggested that people should communicate. When you were speaking, I was thinking about how my wife will walk in randomly with a book and she'll say, oh my gosh, this was just so fascinating. This book said this thing. And then she'll just leave it there. And
Mhm.
that's my cue to, I now need to read this book. And so it's these subtleties of instead saying, you must do this. It's like, well, this was fascinating. And then I have the option to or not to, but I'm inevitably more curious too because it wasn't mandated. Ali, I want to thank you for being who you are. I want to thank you for how you show up in the world. I don't say that lightly. Anytime I'm communicating with somebody, especially on the podcast, I'm very selective. I get so many requests for people to come onto the show to share their stories because inevitably they generate business through sharing the message. And when I met you, I just knew, wow, this is just a really good human being who has tremendous value in himself, who then, by extension, has tremendous value to add to the world. When I learned that you impact men, I was like, yes, I do believe that we come here fully prepared to be the person that we need to be, and we just need to remember. And you're helping so many people remember. I know that you know this already, but I want you to walk away with this today because you've given so many gifts to our audience. Every day in your job as Chief Transformational Officer, you are growing and supporting and reminding men. But those men go home to children, they go home to spouses, and they go into their businesses, whether they work there or run it. And the work that you do is just beautifully and divinely growing legs, and it's going into every crevice of every heart, and it's expanding the capacity and the consciousness of humanity. And from my heart to yours, brother, I see you, I thank you, and I love you. I started with love, I'm going to end with love, and I just want to say thank you so much for pouring so generously into our community today.
Rudy, I received that, brother. Thank you. I'm not going to use a lot more words, but I'm just going to say I'm deeply grateful to have met you, to have become your friend, which showed up at our experience together. So it means a lot to me that you invited me to have this conversation. And thank you for leading with light and love, brother. This was a gift.
Amen to that. To the audience of the Empowered Life podcast, man, you came here to do something so big, so bold, so profound. And like anything, if you want to achieve something in life, well, you need to remember who you are. And there are 1,000 ways that you could remember, but this most certainly is a beautiful, divine way to be able to do it. If you feel aligned with anything that Front Row Dads is doing, anything that Ali's doing as the individual, not as the collective brand of the movement, then I encourage you to follow them. I encourage you to look into a little more of what they're doing. And just in spending a little time here with him, you have no doubt improved the quality of your life. He has given us so many simple, actionable tools that we can implement in our everyday. I don't mean to belabor. You can watch it, you can re listen to it, you can slow it down, you can pause it, you can screenshot it. But I do want to give you some action steps as we end this episode today because We're committed to transformation and to creating an impact. Go outside before you touch your phone. Put your feet on the earth. Be present where your feet are. When you go home, be present to the people that are around you, because that is what it is all about. And the thing that you are chasing isn't where you are chasing it, it's within yourself. I love you. I thank you for your time. And I hope to see you in the next episode of the Empowered Life podcast. Till then, bye bye. If this episode gave you clarity, peace, or a perspective shift, hold on to that. And here is how you lock it in. Subscribe so that you keep building momentum week after week. And if you're the kind of person that believes a good message should travel, please leave a review. Reviews aren't just ratings. They're signals that help this reach the people who are ready for it. And then share this episode with somebody you love, someone you lead, or somebody that you were rooting for. Links are in the show notes so that you can connect with me online and on Instagram. Now go out there and take one beautiful, bold, and aligned step and make it count. I'm going to catch you on the next episode of the Empowered Life Podcast.